Why does practice actually make you better at a physical level inside your skull? Why does stress make you feel like your brain stops working? Why does exercise seem to make people think more clearly? Why does one bad night of sleep wreck your memory the next day? And why is it so hard to break a habit even when you desperately want to? These aren't vague self-help questions. They all have real, specific, measurable answers in neuroscience, and once you understand the actual mechanism behind each one, you stop guessing at self-improvement and start working directly with how your brain is built to change. Let's go through 5 real questions, 5 real answers, backed by actual research. Question 1. Why does practice actually make you better? Every time you repeat a skill, a movement, a phrase, a mental process, your brain sends an electrical signal down a specific neural pathway. Neuroscientist R. Douglas Fields and other researchers studying myelin have shown that repeated signaling along a pathway causes specialized cells called oligodendrocytes to wrap that neural pathway in a fatty insulating layer called myelin. Myelin acts like insulation on an electrical wire. It dramatically increases the speed and efficiency of the signal traveling along that pathway. The more a skill is practiced, the thicker the myelin coating on the relevant pathway becomes, and the faster and more automatic that skill becomes to perform. This is a physical, measurable, structural change in the brain, not a metaphor. This explains why early practice feels slow and effortful. The signal is traveling down a thin, unmyelinated pathway, and it explains why skilled repetition eventually feels almost automatic. The pathway has been physically insulated through consistent use, and the signal now moves dramatically faster. This is also why inconsistent, sporadic practice is so much less effective than steady, repeated practice. Myelin builds through consistent signal repetition, not through occasional bursts of effort. Question 2. Why does stress make your brain stop working? You've felt this. Under real stress, your thinking narrows, your memory gets worse, and clear decision-making feels almost impossible. This has a specific neurological cause. When your brain perceives a threat, the amygdala, your brain's threat detection center, triggers the release of stress hormones, including cortisol. Research by neuroscientist Bruce McEwen and others has shown that elevated cortisol directly impairs activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for reasoning, planning, and impulse control, while simultaneously increasing activity in the amygdala itself. Psychologist Daniel Goleman popularized the term amygdala hijack to describe this shift. Under acute stress, your brain temporarily prioritizes fast, primitive threat response over slow, deliberate reasoning. This is why you can't simply think your way calm during genuine, high-stress moments. The very brain region responsible for calm, rational thinking is measurably suppressed by the stress response itself. This is also why stress management techniques that lower physiological arousal first, slow breathing, brief physical movement, stepping away momentarily, tend to restore clear thinking far more reliably than trying to reason your way out of the stress response directly. Question 3. Why does exercise sharpen your mind? Physical exercise, especially sustained aerobic activity, triggers the release of a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. Research by Dr. John Rady, detailed in his book Spark, and neuroscience research by Dr. Wendy Suzuki has shown BDNF supports the growth of new neurons and strengthens connections between existing ones, particularly in the hippocampus, a brain region central to learning and memory. In simple terms, aerobic exercise appears to promote measurable neurogenesis, the literal growth of new brain cells in a region directly responsible for how well you learn and retain new information. This is why regular exercise is consistently linked across multiple studies to improved memory, sharper focus, and better mood regulation, independent of any effect on physical appearance. This also explains a specific practical detail. Research suggests the cognitive benefits of a single exercise session, improved focus and mood, appear within roughly the same day, while structural changes like increased hippocampal volume develop over consistent weeks and months of regular activity. Both the short-term and long-term effects are real, but they operate on different timelines. Question 4. Why does one bad night of sleep wreck your memory? Neuroscientist Dr. Matthew Walker's research, detailed in Why We Sleep, describes a process called memory consolidation that occurs primarily during sleep. During the day, new information is initially held in the hippocampus in a relatively fragile, short-term state. During sleep, particularly during specific sleep stages, that information is gradually transferred and integrated into the cortex for more stable, long-term storage. This means learning doesn't actually finish the moment you close the book or end the practice session. A significant part of the process happens later while you're asleep. Walker's research has shown that sleep deprivation measurably impairs this consolidation process, meaning information learned before a poor night's sleep is less likely to be effectively retained the next day, regardless of how well it seemed to be understood at the time. This reframes a common mistake. Pulling an all-nighter to cram information right before a deadline may actually work against the very consolidation process needed to retain that information afterward. Adequate sleep isn't separate from learning. Based on this research, it functions as a necessary, active part of the learning process itself. Question 5. How do you actually rewire a habit? Neuroscientist Dr. Anne Gray-Beal and colleagues at MIT have extensively studied the basal ganglia, a brain region central to habit formation. Their research identified a consistent neurological pattern often described as the habit loop. A cue triggers a routine, which produces a reward, and repetition of this cycle causes the basal ganglia to increasingly automate the entire sequence, requiring less and less involvement from conscious, effortful brain regions over time. Critically, Gray-Beal's research indicates that the cue-reward association embedded in this loop tends to remain neurologically present even after a habit has been broken through willpower, which is a major reason old habits are so prone to resurfacing under stress or in a familiar environment, sometimes even after years of apparent success. The practical implication directly from this research is that changing the routine while keeping the same cue and reward is significantly more effective than trying to eliminate the cue and reward entirely. If stress reliably cues a habit of snacking, which delivers a reward of temporary comfort, replacing the specific routine, a short walk instead of the snack, while preserving the same cue and a similar reward tends to succeed far more often than attempting to remove the urge itself. Conclusion and call to action. Let's bring all 5 answers together. Practice physically thickens the myelin around specific neural pathways, which is why consistent repetition, not occasional bursts of effort, is what actually builds skill at a structural level. Stress measurably suppresses your prefrontal cortex while activating your amygdala, which is why calming your physiological state comes before clear thinking is possible, not after. Exercise triggers BDNF release and supports measurable neurogenesis in the hippocampus, which is why physical activity reliably sharpens memory and focus, not just mood. Sleep is when memory consolidation actually happens, transferring what you've learned into stable long-term storage, which is why insufficient sleep can undo a day of otherwise effective learning. And habits run on a cue routine reward loop in the basal ganglia that rarely disappears entirely, which is why changing the routine while keeping the same cue and reward works far more reliably than trying to eliminate the urge through willpower alone. None of this requires guesswork. Self-improvement, understood this way, isn't a collection of motivational slogans. It's a set of concrete, physical processes happening inside a brain that responds predictably to specific, well-documented inputs. Consistent repetition, managed stress, regular movement, adequate sleep, and habit loops addressed at the routine, not just the urge. So here's the question. Of these five, which one have you been getting wrong without realizing it? Practice consistency, stress management, exercise, sleep, or how you've been trying to break a habit? Tell me in the comments. This is Turn Wiser, and I'll see you in the next one.